In with the national session where the deliberations focus on the policy and strategic interventions required for ensuring just transition and green growth. I am again very happy to welcome a very eminent set of guests and panelists for this session, and I'll request each of them to please join me on the dais now. Mr. Anil Kumar Jain, Ex-Secretary, Ministry of Coal, Government of India. Sir. Mr. Pradeep Kumar Jaina, Chief Secretary, Government of Odisha. Mr. Gautam Modi, General Secretary, New Trade Union Initiative. Mr. Mohit Bhargav, CEO, NTPC REL Limited. Mr. Rajnath Ram, Advisor Energy, Niti Aayog, Government of India. And Mr. Vikas Mehta, Executive Director, SED Fund. The session will be moderated by, and I welcome Shirish Sinha, Director Climate, CIF, Climate Investment Fund, to the dais. I'll hand over the session to you, Shirish.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. This is going to be a very power-packed panel, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. So thank you, everyone, for being here. And we'll also try and ensure that we address some of the key issues that we have been identified with the speakers, but we also want to give an equal amount of time so that we can have conversations with the audience in the room. Just to kind of set the context, as a philanthropic foundation, we have been engaging on climate-related work here in India, and some of the early work that has happened on just transition with iForest, we've been very happy to engage with them. And we've seen some of the interesting work that's out there in the publications, which is showing the level of effort that is really happening towards just transition, both at the national as well as the state level. And the purpose of this particular panel essentially is to see how we can get more clarity in terms of what needs to be done at the national level, and therefore can put inputs into the next session that is going much more at the subnational and the state level. Just to set some of the context, I think what we're seeing is, and we heard from the panel before this, was there's a lot of interest at the country level, not just in India, but other countries which are looking at clean energy transition and to accelerate them. And that is also leading to more emphasis and focus towards on the just transition. The latest IPCC report that came out has also put a greater emphasis on a climate resilient development pathway, which needs a very strong emphasis on just transition. What we believe is that the transition needs to be planned and well supported to ensure that nobody is left behind, especially those who are most vulnerable. And if we are not about deliberating about it, we risk losing the gains that we have made on some of the climate action and pledges through the negative social outcomes. Therefore, developing and implementing plans is going to be so critical, and having the right institutional mechanism and frameworks is going to be important. We have seen some examples of which also this report that was released today talks about, of how Global North have actually taken some of the actions. We can draw lessons and learnings from them. Some of the Global South countries are also taking actions related to just transition. But as we heard towards the end of the last session, there is a need for consensus building between the Global South. Otherwise, there would be a lot of competition that will basically be happening on the resources. There is a momentum in India at the national level. Mr. Jain, when he was there at the Ministry of Coal, there was a lot of conversation happening within Ministry of Coal on coal mine closure, and that was also had a very strong emphasis on just transition. We have seen that Jharkhand has set up a task force on just transition. So there is a growing momentum that is essentially building up at the national level. So the way we have structured this particular panel is that we'll have two keynote addresses, and followed by question and answer with the panelists, and then we'll open up for conversation with the audience. And with that, I wanted to first invite Mr. Anil Jain, former Secretary to the Government of India, for his opening remarks. And Mr. Jain, in particular, given the role that you have been playing and the conversation, and we've been part of several conversations with you on just transition, what role do you think the policy support from the central government is going to play in ensuring a just energy transition, especially in the light that India has now a 2070 net zero goal target to start with? So over to you, Mr. Jain.
Thank you. Good afternoon, friends. And my thanks to the organizers for giving me this opportunity. The question raised for my comments is what kind of policy framework can the central government provide for this entire story of just transition to happen seamlessly and making sure no one is left behind. When you look at developing countries, including India, you find that the energy governance in these countries, unlike the OECD, is split into various ministries because we have had supply side issues. We continue to have them. You might have a US DOE, Integrated Ministry, Department of Energy there. In UK, the name has been evolving, but essentially it has been in one place. But in India, you have a separate ministry for coal, separate for petroleum, and MNRE, renewable, etc. So first and foremost, it becomes very important for Government of India to put its act together and have a unified policy. Because in the coal ministry, well, I retired a couple of months back, but speaking for them wearing that hat, our charter is to produce as much coal as we can. India's per capita electricity consumption numbers, per capita overall energy consumption numbers are dismal. We are short in coal supply. We spent billions of dollars in importing coal, especially coking coal. So first and foremost, this act of energy transition has to be put together in a fine coordinated manner. If the power ministry is going to keep demanding more coal because there's just not enough renewable, as you all know, that about 72 to 73% of our electricity mix comes from coal sector. And India is growing its power demand at the rate of 5 to 6% on a CAGR basis. So for that, we need lots of coal. So that is number one. Number two, when this transition happens, we all know a lot of funding will be required. Coal mines may have to be closed down. The mines, so far, when they were closed down, they didn't bother so much about a justified mine closure, taking care of the greenery there, the water channels, and the people who were dependent on it, their infrastructure. There were hospitals, schools run by coal companies. What happens to them? So when this funding is called upon, will it be the coal companies who will have to bear the brunt? Will there be some cess? There'll be some taxation. It's just possible that NTPC goes the green way and doesn't demand that coal. So the financing has to be very well done. The states and the center. This is another third aspect I wanted to bring to light, that there is a constitutional setup in which there's a division of responsibilities and a division of authority. There is a fine balance in the federal structure of power and responsibilities. It should not so happen that the taxation powers or the power to garner resources to fund this transition are with the central government and the responsibility goes over to the state government. That might queer the pitch. It may even destabilize our democracies. So how will this happen? The state government, we have the Chief Secretary Odisha sitting with us. People will look upon him when they lose their jobs, when the infrastructure goes away. It's quite understandable that coal-bearing areas also have lots of industries which are dependent on coal. The aluminium, the bauxite, the steel, cement are located close to those coal-bearing areas. Eastern India, Central India, which has so far been rich producers of coal, coal is concentrated in only 7 states of India. They haven't seen much of a growth of renewables. Renewables has happened in Western India, Central India, mostly South India. So far there was cheap coal-based power available in these parts. If that dwindles away, will suddenly the renewables happen? The policy framework so far in the country for growing renewables was on the basis of the L1 prices quoted by generators. So all the generation shifted to Rajasthan, Gujarat, because they were solar endemic states. So tomorrow, when this power goes away, how will these states meet their energy requirements? So this is another challenge. And finally, since we have dearth of time, the coal jurisdiction is largely in the central acts. Government of India governs these acts. So when there is a coal mine closure, those lands which are acquired from the landowners. So land is a very sensitive issue all over the world, especially for a dense country with high population density here. So those acquisitions took place expressly only for coal mining purposes. So if you want to repurpose those mines or monetize those mines, there will be issues because you deprived somebody of his land, put it to coal use because the country needed energy, and tomorrow you want to use it for colonization and stuff like that. In Australia, they are developing golf courses. So can we do that in India? Can we give it away for other purposes? So I think so far the pitch has been very high on funding. How to fund the just energy transition, and this is a negotiating position which countries are taking, developing countries, as we call them, developing South with the developed North. But coming down to a country like India, we have the G20 here and several like-minded nations who have this problem sitting in this hall. Now the issue is the management of this whole thing. We are talking of transitioning an energy system which was developed over a period of 100 years and trying to dismantle through external cues and policy framework over a period of 2-3 decades, whereas the story of energy has evolved endogenically. When from coal, it went to oil, then it went to gas, and then the renewables. In the West, it was the markets who determined it. Technologies, solar panels started producing lots of electricity and at low prices, high efficiency. So it has been happening like that over there. But in India and in developing countries, you are going to make it happen through policy. So this entire business, the management of the transition is, I think, a challenge which we need to be thinking about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jain, thank you so much for setting the context and some of the, not just the, we often say, okay, land can be repurposed, but there are practical challenges which also needs to be dealt into it. And you touched on the role of state and what state governments will have to do, and I'm very glad that Mr. P.K. Jena, the Chief Secretary, Government of Odisha, is here. We know that Odisha is going to play a critical role when it comes to energy transition. What are the challenges as well as the opportunities for implementing a just transition, both at the subnational or the state level or at the district level is going to be there? And how is Odisha planning in this regard? I know you've taken an initiative to set up an Eastern India working group which will talk about just transition, because bringing together the Eastern India state, which is a very great initiative to start with. But how do we ensure that as these transition discussions are happening both at the state level and that they're also aligned to the national goals and objectives that India has committed globally on its climate action?
Thank you. I think the tone for the discussion has been set by Jain sir very, very succinctly. The issues are, those are the issues. And yes, there are three aspects. One is, okay, we can throw coal, we can throw petroleum aside, and we can say, okay, we'll build renewables. We'll have a lot of new sources of energy. So that's one part. Technology is there. Now, economy of scale has established that we can get cheaper renewables. But then a state like Odisha, where we produce 24% of the country's coal, we hold almost 1/3 of all the minerals of the country, and we have all the major mineral-based industries located in the state. All are dependent. In fact, out of my 20,000 megawatt of power in the state, the captive consumption, the captive powers are about 12,000 megawatt. And beyond that, they also draw another 2,000-3,000 megawatt from my grid. So out of 20,000 megawatt of consumption, 15,000 megawatt is consumed by the industries, major industries. How quickly, how smoothly these industries are going to transit from thermal power to say renewables? That's the biggest challenge. And where will the renewables come from? Do we have that much of as sir said, most of the solars are located in the west and center and south. Do you have that much of transmission capacity to carry the power to the state? That's two Odisha, that's one. Then what happens to the cost of transmission of this power, and how does it impact those industries? That is the one question. Second is already flagged, and that will be the biggest challenge for the states. The coal mining, the transportation, and that is quite human intensive. Lot of manpower is engaged, both in mining, in transportation, in logistics, and then in those 10, 12 districts, the whole economy revolves around mining. So the moment you are switching over from, or you are closing down those mines in next few years, the joblessness that comes up, how is the state going to handle it? Transition is technologically possible, it's feasible if adequate finance is available. Industries and the governments can switch over from the fossil fuels to better form of fuels. But the issue is, what do we do with these thousands and thousands and maybe few million households, their sustenance, their livelihoods, and all the associated economy around those people? So that would require a lot of investment in thinking about them, to give them alternate livelihood opportunities, options, to reskill and skill. So whether it is whether the states have that much of resources, and Anil sir has brought out a very interesting facet: power of taxation with the state, but responsibility with the center, and the responsibility with the states. How do the states take this responsibility, and what should be the trade-off between center and state? I'm happy that Niti Aayog advisor is here. This is some very, very challenging aspect of the entire transition game, and this must be addressed well. So both central government and the states need to work together to find, to see that the right policies are there, and the entire transition, the adverse one is positive impact of this transition on environment, but the adverse impact on the human lives, a balancing has to be done. And third point, which Anil sir has already brought out, say coal mining land. Earlier, similarly, few thousand acres of salt pan land. Now we don't produce in the state any salt. Those lands, coal mine, bottomed out mines, or even those land which you have acquired and are not going to be put for mining. So those lands should come back to the state, so that state can think of developing them for creating livelihood opportunities for these people. But then coal companies, they say, we have acquired under CB Act and we are not supposed to return. So this is a policy, very serious policy issue, and there is already a bit of unrest developing in those coal belts. So this is another area we need to work. Next is whether the states have the capacity to effect a smooth transition. This transition would require good policies, good implementable action plans, required funding, for which maybe several financing options and financial instruments have to be redesigned, and whether the states have the capacity to work in all these things. I suppose, and I believe, being the Chief Secretary of the state and having worked in energy sector for quite a few years, I believe, and having worked in transportation sector and everything, I believe the capacity is not there in the states. So lot of partnership would be required, lot of guidance is required, lot of technical support would be required to the states if you want to make a painless or low pain transition. So there, the states would require, apart from good policy and program support from the central government, apart from good funding arrangement and financial support from the states, from the center, states would require cooperation and support from the corporate world, from the bilaterals and multilateral funding, as well as technical agencies available, and all those knowledge partners, scientific organizations, and those NGOs and CSOs who are working in environment sector, their support would be required. And then communicating this transition plan and the possible adverse impacts and how the states and the central government are going to handle this process need to be communicated very well with those stakeholders and particularly the vulnerable people. So how do we do it? This would require a lot of support to the state. And say in Odisha, we have now come up with one of the finest industrial policy resolution, very the best in the country, where we are going to give lot of impetus to hydrogen, to floating solar, to other renewable forms. But then one issue for Niti Aayog Energy Advisor: floating solars are at least 20% costlier than land-based conventional solar. Can we think of a BGF sort of arrangement so that states can convert all those vast reservoirs, dams and reservoirs in the state to produce and generate solar? So this is possibly one of the things which is a low-hanging fruit, and it can be very easily done. And then supporting the states in having a massive skilling and reskilling program through expert organizations. That would be something which I would like to point at this juncture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jain. And thank you. And I think you kind of touched on something that I wanted to ask. And I know I also have promised you that I will. You need to go for another meeting, so we'll let at around 2:20 in another 5 minutes or so. But before you go, and I just wanted to ask you. You listed certain things where the national government needs to do, and I think that what are the policies that are required, how certain gaps which are there, both in terms of skilling that would be needed, or in terms of bridging some of the costs for the new technology investments. But another aspect of just transition, which is also very much emphasized in this report that was released today, and that needs to be done at the state level, or especially you talked about communities that are going to be impacted. So how do you, and what are your thinkings on you will ensuring that the social dialogue, the construct that is needed to make sure that the transition plans that you said needs to be prepared, right? That they are people-centric, because that's what is going to be so critical. And how would state like to take that forward?
Okay. Odisha is one state which understands the climate dimensions of this just transition. I think no other state understands it better. In last 3 years, I myself, as the head of the disaster management organization of the state, I have handled 7 cyclones in 3 years. And you may be knowing, every time we have come up very successfully. And last 7 cyclones, fortunately, have been with zero casualty, zero human casualties. And it is not because the government has done it. It's because we have taken the communities with us. It is because of a good communication strategy, good decentralized plans, and then working with local CSOs, NGOs as partners, and taking Panchayat Raj institutions as a prime partner in the entire game. So if we have to succeed, we have to train our Panchayat Raj institution members, our elected representatives, convince them, then go to villages. We have now most of the states have excellent community organizations in the form of women self-help groups. We also have 7.5 lakh women self-help groups, 7.5 million women members. So working with them, convincing them that what are the ill effects of the present strategy and how it can be remedied, and take them on board while doing the planning. If we don't take them on board, possibly one miscommunication somewhere, one misunderstanding somewhere is going to create bigger problems, and we can't make any headway. So working with people can be possible with CSO and NGO partners. Governments are not good communicators. We need partners.
Thank you. And I think that's a very interesting point. And I think that there is a lot of lessons in what you gave the example of, how you've managed the disaster management post the super cyclone, and the way which the state has built capacity is a huge. And I think that's something I think iForest and others need to document so that it becomes easily available.
And I'll just add one point. I'm thankful to iForest. We are working closely. In fact, iForest has assured us they will work with us, and maybe they will mobilize some technical partners to guide us. The way we have been the leading state when it comes to disaster mitigation and adaptation, we would also like to be one of the leading state in taking this just transition approach forward. So there I would call upon everybody to kindly help us in preparing actionable transition plans, and also help us in implementing and monitoring the things, including good communication strategy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And certainly I'm sure with the set of technical partners that all of us work with, I think that this, we should be in a position to provide support that the state needs. So Mr. Jena, thank you so much. I know you need to go, so I will, I think a small token.
I'm one way happy that I could make it because of UPSC, where I was required to be present today. Otherwise, State Assembly in session, I could not have come out. Thanks to UPSC for ensuring that I participate here. And since I have one more meeting and then I have to catch a return flight this evening, I'll have to take leave now.
No, thank you so much. But I think there's a small token of for you from the. Okay. Thank you. All right. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jena, for being here. And just wanted to move on. Mr. Rajnath Ram, you heard Mr. Jena give a lot of ideas of the policy support and the role that Niti Aayog can play. And we have certainly seen that in addition to the long-term vision that India has globally committed, the Prime Minister also said about India to become energy independence have the energy independence by 2047. How do you see energy transition happening in the next 2 decades, and how can the role that Niti Aayog can play in terms of supporting the states which are ready to discuss around the just transition?
Let me first thank the organizer for inviting me here. I'll start with the 3 key points that it was highlighted by Jan sir. First is the unified policy for the country. Second, of course, the financing. And third, the center and state strong coordination. So let me start with our total primary energy consumption as of now. The mix of the fossil and non-fossil, if you go, so roughly around 84% our primary energy requirement comes from the fossil-based energy sources, and more than 50% is the coal, followed by the oil and the natural gas. These are the 3 main component, and all non-fossil is constituting around 16%. So how you are perceiving the transition? I mean, reversing the trend, moving from fossil-based to the non-fossil-based kind of energy. It means you need a very huge kind of effort to penetrate the renewable energy sources, even the non-fossil-based kind of energy sources, which includes the solar, wind, hydro, even the nuclear. And all these have challenges associated with them. So bringing them into the mainstream, reducing your fossil-based energy sources is a huge challenge. And that definitely require a huge coordination, not only at the central level with the state, also that Assistant Chief Secretary of Odisha has mentioned they lack in terms of their capacity building. So that's one aspect, because they also need to know what is the energy transition, what should be their roadmap for the state to moving from now onward till 2047 or even the net zero scenario 2070. So that's the another kind of challenge. Accessing the finance that we have mentioned, it is limited to the certain technologies, and that is also based on some definition or taxonomy defined by certain pocket of the world. So that aspect needs to be also streamlined, and that would be only possible if we have very strong coordination, geopolitical relationship, and building consensus on that. The other aspect is the phasing down the the fossil based energy resources, and coal is being the major. Some of the aspect may definitely be considered, which are the, I mean, closing of some of the coal mines, and that can be repurposed and can be reutilized. That's one aspect. But again, the kind of their livelihood, the economic activities related with these coal mines, how to transform them and how to ensure their livelihood so that they can switch from one energy sources to the other and more cleaner options. There are other options also available within the countries where coal can be used in a more cleaner form. Advanced ultra supercritical, that's one aspect is being also considered, which reduces considerably your emission. CCUS can be also a better technology to use coal in a more cleaner form. Still, I think the personnel or the staff remaining to the coal sector still remain intact, but they will be more gradually graduated to the using this new kind of energy sources. And maybe later on, I mean, if you are planning for net zero by 2070, certainly you have to phase down the fossil energy sources. You don't have any option. But that will take time. But in the meantime, these are the immediate term solutions where we can certainly work upon. What Niti Aayog is taking the steps towards, you might have also heard that in the recent budget announcement, we have initiated a state support mission. So a separate budget has been provided under this this year, and this will be the 3-year kind of financing support, and we'll be reaching out to each states for supporting them, capacity building, hand holding, and this is a kind of on a mission mode approach. So these are the 3-year activities, and we'll be reaching out. Recently, we had a discussion with the Rajasthan government, and they were very, supportive, and they were ready to listen to Niti Aayog. And some of the tools we developed a long back. I worked under Mr. Jain. So India Energy Security Scenario, we are going to launch it very soon. So that will provide a clear transition roadmap. And this is a tool, a kind of one can download and it can play around it. It can generate a number of scenarios with that. We are also will be also utilizing GIS energy resources map. We have worked with the ISRO, and we are taking this to the states to develop their resource adequacy report. So that will be well utilized by the states agencies, and they can develop for their integrated resource planning for the energy resources, and a clear-cut roadmap for the energy transition. Dashboard is also we are trying to percolate to the state level. And that dashboard would be a state-specific thing for monitoring and tracking of their progress. So these are the activities we are pursuing at the NITI level. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ram, for setting the kind of outline that and the vision that Niti Aayog has in terms of how you want aiming to support the states. And I obviously will come back to some questions from the audience and as a follow-up question. Mr. Bhargav, I wanted to turn to you as one of India's leading energy producing companies. And we've seen the shift that NTPC has made over these years and is making, continues to make those transition. How do you, and what is NTPC's views in terms of the conversation that is happening both at national and globally on just energy transition?
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me, and thanks to my friend Chandrabhushan ji. And actually, I am a last-minute replacement for my boss. So apologies for that also. So, but then I'm happy Rajnath ji is here, because otherwise we sometimes get pulled into all these meetings, and Anil sir, of course, knows that very well. So but happy to be here. We have connected earlier also than we did on the virtual mode. Good to be in a physical mode here. So let me start first by the energy transition part, and then we go to the just part. So energy transition, I think the whole discussion or the discourse now is not on why, it's on how. And Government of India has set very clear targets in terms of adding renewable capacity, in terms of reducing its carbon intensity, and these are very tangible and measurable. We also have as you said, global north, setting targets for net zero, which are so far away in distance. I'm not sure how many in the room will survive. I won't be there, I'm sure. 2050. So these are all targets which appear to have taken things forward at a very glacial pace. But what we have done through our NDCs is very clearly saying 2030 will have 500 gigawatts of non-fossil capacity. 2030 will reduce our carbon emission by 1 billion tons of CO2 very clearly. 2030 will reduce our carbon intensity by 45%. So these are targets which will require work immediately, which will require us to deliver. And these have to be visible in the next few years. Renewable being one, because I had the renewables at NTPC. So our targets are very clear. And what we can see is, if I put a number, NTPC today has about 71 gigawatts of installed capacity, out of which we have about 3 gigawatts of variable renewables and another 3 of large renewables, hydro primarily. So from this number, what we intend to do is by 2030-32, we want to create a 60 gigawatt of renewable capacity in NTPC. The broad idea is that we are aligned with the national targets, and two, we create a portfolio of renewables which is almost as big in size as the coal-based portfolio now. So for us, transition is already planned, under implementation. We have created a core group. The renewables group is now expanding. And in fact, if I can say, in this year alone, our capacity addition on renewables was more than the capacity addition on the coal-based side. Of course, coal-based is still happening, and I think for everyone in the room is aware that for India, we will probably still require coal-based power, because still we are able to very clearly find alternatives to cheaper source of power, reliable power, 24/7 power. The role of coal is not going away. What we're also trying to do is not only add renewables, that remains the largest pillar for us. We're also working on the energy efficiency side. We're working on circular economy side. We are also trying to green our fossil fuel sources. We're also working on CCU, which Mr. Ranaji referred to just now. So these are all things which are happening under implementation, and we hope to actually make them work in terms of reducing our carbon intensity also, which in turn will help India also reduce its carbon intensity. So I'll just take a minute to cover a few of these things. For example, carbon capture and utilization. In Vindhyachal, we are setting up a pilot project. We'll capture carbon dioxide along with green hydrogen. We'll mix that and produce green methanol. Methanol today, for the people who don't know in the room, India imports almost 90-95% of its methanol requirements. So this could be a major way in which we not only capture the carbon dioxide, we're also green hydrogen, so renewables. So this is the way we are greening the entire methanol value chain. We are greening the entire system in which the country uses methanol now. And this is CCU, carbon capture utilization, because we feel that unless until we are able to find ways and means to use captured carbon dioxide, there will always be an issue. Other thing which we're trying to do is to use biomass-based pellets, and I'm sure people already know that the government has issued a mandate which says that up to 10% of the fuel capacity in coal-based plants can be replaced by renewable agri-based biomass. So we already placed orders for almost close to, I think, 5 million tons. The bigger challenge is actually getting the biomass. And this, I would pause here to say that this is actually a part of the overall. We didn't start it out as a just transition strategy, but this is a strategy which will help just transition, because we are creating employment opportunities for coal-based plants which are getting to use renewable power plants, renewable sources, and creating employment opportunities, which I think was covered both by Jain Saab and Jana Saab earlier. Other thing which we did recently, and I would say with a lot of happiness, is that we actually have converted municipal solid waste into charcoal. And this We have been successfully able to demonstrate it for 200 tons per day. We actually plan to expand it quickly in other cities also. This we did in Varanasi, where we got all the support from the district authorities. This is green charcoal. Municipal solid waste. I mean, just imagine if we are able to take care. I'm not saying we are going to take care, but if we are able to take care of Ghazipur and Bhalaswa, which are very clear eyesores for all the people, all of us living in Delhi. I mean, huge mountains of garbage. But this can definitely challenge the way. So we use that garbage, convert it into charcoal. We fire it in the coal-based plant in the same boilers. This is green power. This is reliable power. Now the jury is still out, and I'll need the support of my friend from Niti Aayog to ensure that this is very clearly labeled green, because we are trying to solve too many issues in one go. Ultimately, we were able to get charcoal which had, if I may say, characteristics of good quality coal. Jain Saab knows what kind of coal quality we have been getting in NTPC, and he had been at the forefront of helping us get better quality coal. So this will be good quality coal. The GCV is over 4,000 kilocal ground, which can be easily fired in our boilers. So this is the other way. So the way we are trying to look at transition is not only by adding renewable, which will be the largest pillar. So let's now move to just transition. And just is something which is now, I think, at par with energy. When we talk about energy transition, just is as important as anything else. But here, there's something I like to mention, and maybe, I don't know whether I'll be taken to the right spirit. Do we need to create a scare story around just transition, or do we need to ensure that it happens? And let me give an example, which is probably not a very good example. I don't know, 20 years ago, 25 years ago in India, we started saying computerization is going to happen. We were not using the word digital then. And everyone said that computerization will take away the jobs. What is the result of computerization, and if I may say, the effect of digitalization? Everyone's life has improved. People have got jobs in various categories. I mean, earlier, if you remember, people say you do engineering or doctorate. Now everyone is doing God knows what. And what my kids are doing, half the time I don't understand. But they're doing well. That's important. And I'm sure all of us have children, young people who are doing a lot of good things because of the power of computerization. So I'm sure just transition will happen. When I said we are doing it, yes, we are doing it. We are also investing in skilling. In the state of Odisha, for example, we have set up one large medical college. In the state of Odisha, we have set up, I don't know how many ITIs, and if I look at all of NTPC, I think we have helped set up about 29 ITIs. These are skill centers. We are not necessarily training people for renewable jobs. Let us be clear, renewable may or may not be having the same number of jobs as a coal-based plant. But we need to prepare people for jobs, whatever the kind of jobs. So if we start thinking that there will be one-to-one replacement of job for an energy specialist from coal to renewable, that may or may not happen because the number of jobs in renewables is low. But we need to be ready to prepare them, skill them. And this is where I like to say that when we talk about the developed nations funding, probably they also need to help us fund this, because we've been asking them for technology, and I'm quite sure those guys are not going to give us technology. Let's ask them for money to start skilling, capability building, which probably I'm sure they'll be much easier to move forward with. So I'll probably stop here. I can see Shirish, fidgeting. So, and I'll be happy to take.
I forgot to say to all the participants, there is a clock there which makes me fidgety.
Which is actually not working. So
no, it's actually working. Huh? That's one. Okay, great. No, Mr. Bhargav, thank you so much. And I think for outlining the kind of initiatives that NTPC is doing, and obviously what we hear largely is about your major investments going into large renewables, but the set of other things that you're doing, which is also interesting to know. And I agree with you. I don't think anyone in this room is basically saying that just transition is a scare story. What we're saying, it's a needed part of it, and therefore it needs to be planned better than some of the transitions that have happened in the past. But thank you so much for the remarks, and we'll come back to you in the next round. I will turn to Mr. Gautam Modi. Mr. Modi, you represent what I've been told is a very independent trade union, non-political, which often is a bit challenging when it comes to trade union. How are you, and what do you think will be the role of trade unions when it comes to the just transition that is being discussed generally?
Thank you for asking me to speak with you this afternoon. I come from a political organization. It's not affiliated to a political party. Trade unionism is essentially about redistributive justice. And if that is the case, then a trade union is a profoundly political organization. Before I respond to your question, I might just go a little into the etymology of the phrase just transition. In 2008, the American trade unions came up with the phrase green transition, which then became a slogan of the Obama presidential campaign. In 2010, my colleagues in the British trade union movement, after much debate and several detailed papers on the ecological crisis we face, actually came up with the term just transition. And it was over the next 5 years that they persuaded their governments to adopt it as the road forward at the Paris UNFCCC. So, just transition is an ecological transition in its full meaning, which must be socially just and equitable. I find your question actually theoretical, because it's not clear to me who is engaging trade unions. So how trade unions will react is a hypothetical question. I might also add, social justice and equity would require a society to be more democratic rather than less democratic. We're actually living in an environment in which employers think they can jettison trade unions, and government thinks it can do without talking with trade unions. That is actually the reality we're living in. So much as every person who's working faces the ecological crisis more than those who actually aggregate wealth, there is today an absence of discussion, of debate, and of hearing. There's a colleague of mine from the coal union sitting here. A month ago, we discussed the just transition in great detail in a trade union meeting. We had views for and against. We argued. But we recognize, all of us, that it is something that we have to deal with. There will be, as we understand it, job losses. The question is, how do we create jobs for the jobs lost? But there's also going to be a problem of the jobs that are simply not being created. These are fairly fundamental questions. So a just transition also requires a stable macroeconomic environment. These are all things which I think should be on the table if we're to expect a serious trade union engagement. And I would certainly go forward to say I wouldn't make the distinction between party-affiliated and non-party unions. I think all unions in a reasonable environment are reasonable. Today we are living through a very unreasonable environment, and expecting us to agree to anything when it's one-sided is genuinely impractical.
Thank you, Mr. Modi. Thank you, and also for correcting that, the way to look at just transition is slightly different than some of us have been thinking. And I'll come back to you. I have something that I want to build on your remark, this one, because thank you for patiently waiting so far. Now, you represent philanthropies, and as some of the work that you have been doing in India, you've been helping build up the capacity around just transition through academic institutions and others. From your perspective and the way Set Fund has been working, what role can you be playing in furthering the energy transition and ensuring that it also remains a just transition?
Thanks, Shirish. Well, first of all, I don't stick the claim to actually represent the philanthropies. There are many good philanthropies represented in this room. and I don't want to be at the front end of that. So that's one. And I also don't represent all the men working on climate and energy on this panel. But what I would say that what I do represent is a mindset that we as philanthropies typically support the ambitions of the central government and the state government on climate and energy. So if we talk about just transition specifically, I think we can do three things more broadly. Number one, I would say, is that we should really bring the diverse partners together. Very often, I think we work in a cocoon, and we typically work with the nonprofits or perhaps with the governments. But the reality is that, as we saw this morning, in the iForest, one of the slides stuck out for me was that of the $900 odd billion that we talk about, 60% of them are expected to come from the private sources and only 30% from the public sources. If that is the case, then why philanthropy as a change agent, as a catalyst, not engaging with the private sector? So I think that is one role that philanthropy should play in essentially thinking of our projects, our support to organizations, to projects, which can be the pipeline which can absorb climate finance in the near future. So think of yourself as a catalyst which can do that. And in terms of the second thing that we can do is that as a catalyst, not come with the top-down global north approach, especially for the international philanthropies. I think it's really important to do this from ground up and look at as to what are the needs of the communities, of the state-owned enterprises, of the governments in terms of building out that energy and the just transition, and essentially take it from there. And the final thing I would say is that we keep on talking about climate change as a threat. And as my co-panelist Mohit stole my thunder in the last 1 minute of what he said, is that yes, it is a threat, but it is also the opportunity, the biggest opportunity of our lifetime in terms of bringing about systemic change, in terms of how we build our energy systems, how we look at energy consumption, energy production, and also, dare I say, building equity in the energy axis. So I think this is what I broadly believe are the framework around which the philanthropies should work in the energy and the just transition space. But I'm sure there's more that we can discuss.
Thanks, Vikas. Thank you so much for setting that very clearly, that that's the role where the philanthropies can come in. Before I open to the audience, and I think we should give time, so I just want to go back to you. One remark that you made was around how do we create jobs for the losses, that job losses that will take place, but also that will not get happened, that jobs will not get created. What we also know from our work and experiences that in the India's energy transition sectors, and not just energy sector, but other sectors also, which will witness transitions of these nature, there's a greater dependency of informal workforce. And how does trade unions, because the way we'll be addressing the informal workforce.
Trade unions will address informal workers as they do. Attempt to unionize them aggressively. But they don't, as is obvious, succeed easily. Why? Not because trade unions are wanting, but actually we're determined by two factors. One, an extremely aggressive, brutal version of capitalism, where the rate of profit is almost distilled to the wage cost. And second, perhaps at one level in the foreseeable future, an insurmountable macroeconomic problem of being a low employment society and therefore having simply huge, phenomenal, unmatched, unparalleled in the history of modern society anywhere else except in the subcontinent, not just India, in the subcontinent, surplus labor. Now, both need to be addressed if the informal sector has to be addressed. You cannot unionize a factory which has a rotating workforce. You cannot unionize a workplace where workers come and go. Because they have no they have no universal access to health. So they go back to the village to take care of a dying parent. They give up their job for that. That's one example of why they don't stay. Another example of why they don't stay or why they aren't around is they get fired when they try to form a union. These are very fundamental issues that this society needs to address. And this is really, at the end of the day, between a stable macroeconomy as opposed to an extremely high rate of firm level profits. This is where Indian capitalism needs to find its meeting point. Does it want to build a stable macroeconomy with a growing market, with growing consumption, with a stable workforce that is high skill? If I take a minute to go into government skill development program, and what NTPC is doing notwithstanding, much of government's skill development program is to create skills for self-employment. You cannot build a stable macroeconomy with tea vendors. I mean, that is a plain and simple truth. Stable economies are built with standard forms of employment, 8-hour workday, a living minimum wage, healthcare, social security, including a pension, and some reasonable time off for everybody to rest, take a break, attend to family, and perhaps also regenerate them socially. If we're unable to build that society, then we're in a virtuous circle of being unable to create a stable macroeconomy. And I think I will just, stretch this one further. We don't really have anywhere near a modicum of a just transition. We've invested and are very proud of the scale of our investment in solar. We are not addressing the displacement of the vast numbers of people from the huge pieces of land that have been evacuated to build those solar plants in Gujarat and in Rajasthan. That is a serious problem in this country. That's a persistent challenge. It's not just a challenge of jobs. It's also the challenge of people, why people are so attached to their land. These are fundamental political questions that we must address and we can't get away from.
Thank you. And I needed to get this from you so that we can open it now for a set of questions. What we'll do is take a few questions, and then maybe towards the end, I'll come back to the panelists for some closing remarks. I see one hand there. Can we get a microphone there to the gentleman in the second row? Okay, see the second hand there. So please be brief and just a question to whomever you want to ask this question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm S.Q. Zama from Coal India, coal industry, working for more than 5 decades. I have myself worked in coal mines for 37 years. So what my colleague, Mr. Gautam Modi has said, the situation is not so conducive so far as just transition is concerned. Because our ex-coal secretary, he may not be knowing me, but I know him because he has been coal secretary, and just few months back you have retired. So I have just some questions, not questions, but some query. That while you were discharging your duties as secretary, sir, is there any planning with the government of India as to how we will pursue the just transition? Is there any task force or any committee constituted that what are the measures to be will be followed by this just transition? Because for last I think since 2015 there is no consultation with any trade union working in India, whether it is independent trade union or the central trade unions. The Ministry of Labour has not conducted any Indian Labour Conference, no standing committees in operation for last 7 years. So, how you can ignore the main stakeholder, the workers, the trade unions, if you want to bring just transition? Because it is we know that lot of literature is there. Once we have signed the Paris Accord, we are bound to follow it. There is no option. And even today, workers are not aware. Many of the workers, mass of the workers, they don't know what is just transition, what is climate change. It has not percolated down. So these are few shortcomings which we feel as an activist in coal industry, that it will be it is a huge work, but how to bring it down into reality? Suppose tomorrow what will happen? So we want to know from your mouth, sir, Jain Saab, ki aapka perspective when you were in the government kya tha? Please.
Thank you, sir. We'll Mr. Jain, I'll come to you. If I saw a hand in the back. Can you get me there? Yes, sir. Let me go there and I'll come back. Sorry. Yeah.
So my question is, citing the latest Brahmapuram fire incident which happened in Kerala, which is my state, my question is, how can we convert solid, non-biodegradable, non-recyclable waste into energy in low cost? Because even if we have technologies for converting it, it has a huge amount, or the cash which is involved in this is large. So how can we reduce this amount and make it more prosperous? That is my question.
Sorry, one more hand. Sorry to make you walk again, but gentlemen here.
K.K. Roy Chaudhary, I'm an energy consultant. I would like to ask Mr. Gautam Modi, sir, you might be knowing about International Trade Union coming very positively on global just transition, and they have also supported closure of old mines, etc. If any update you have, you may enlighten here.
Thank you, sir. Okay. I don't see any other hands. So, Mr. Jain, I know this was a very targeted question on you and your role. And the point around government's role, I agree. I mean, obviously he was executing in that capacity. Would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Let me tell you that, I mean, directly answering my direct role. As of now, I have been supporting increase in coal production. So, as you know, your director is also here from CCL. I think he can add some reply if he wishes to. That by opening up of commercial coal mining regime, which I opened up in 2020, or the government opened up, and increasing targets of Coal India, you have been given a target to go to 1 billion ton. Right now, the ground is totally fertile for more and more employment, engaging more laborers, etc., etc. But to answer to you on a national perspective, until Glasgow COP in 2021, there was no committed stand of the government of India that when will we do the net zero and when will we plateau and start falling. It is only after the Prime Minister gave this commitment from the country that in 2070 we will achieve net zero. After that, I think the duty devolved on the entire government to start thinking and preparing, because if it is to happen in 2070, you can't wait till 2069. So those preparatory talks, etc., have been happening, and I don't want to get into detail. I think some World Bank assistance was also coming for just mine closure. I think one gentleman from World Bank will be speaking later in the evening here. They were making visits to coal mines, understanding. I think right now, the entire country is in a scoping mode. So the stage where actual consultations, discussions with the stakeholders who will be affected adversely, that stage has still not reached. But from the government side, the academic thought, the science, the knowledge, just mind. जैसे आपको मालूम है कि 2010 के पहले, those mines which closed before 2010, the mining plan and the environment clearance did not provide for a very scientific closure. It is only after 2010. So those orders have also been issued so that that burden doesn't come on Coal India's balance sheet. So some orders were issued that they can levy some charge on coal price and do that. So I think right now we have not reached that stage where those consultations will happen.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. All right.
Hello, I am R.V. Prasad, Director Technical, Central Coalfield Limited. Just I will add to our Secretary Sir for Jama Shah. Coal Ministry has already constituted a committee under the leadership of Mr. B.P. Pati. They have just broadly outlined what should be done in the just transition. And the committee report has already come out. And the second, the Coal India and the Central Coalfield Limited in particular is working with the World Bank to frame the approach of the mine closure and also for just transition. About 2 months back, we have a grand meeting calling all trade unions working at the Central Coalfield Limited. And we are already engaged with the trade union as well as local community for a small intervention which we are desiring in Piparwar project of Central Coalfield Limited and the West Bokaro also. So this is for information.
Thank you so much for adding. Okay. Mr. Bhagat, can I ask you, there was a question about giving the example of Kerala and how the waste technology can be.
Yeah, pardon me. I mean, I kind of missed. Where's the gentleman? Is he there? Yeah, so were you asking that there is a lot of solid waste available which can be converted into energy?
And the cost?
Okay, so that's always a challenge. So cost reduction is a challenge, but I can share with you that what we have done in Varanasi, in that case, the broad numbers are in line with whatever is the cost of coal. So if we are able to reach that also, that makes a lot of sense. Because for example, if we are buying coal at X and this MSW to charcoal cost is also X, then it makes sense. So I'm not sure about the composition of the waste you're talking about. But in Varanasi, we are doing that exactly, and which we plan to take to a lot of other cities. We already signed MOUs with a couple of other cities also.
Great. Thank you so much. Mr. Ranjan, I just wanted to come back to you, and I don't know, there are no other hands in the audience. Oh, there is one here. Okay. I'll come back to you. Just give me a second. Now, you heard some of the views around what needs to happen. As Mr. Jan said, the conversation around just transition is just about starting. You had Mr. Jena talk about the kind of role states can play and what support states would need. As a policy think tank for the government, what is Niti Aayog's vision going to be when it comes to just transition in India?
I'll start with let me first make it clear. I mean, just transition is not only the coal. So absolutely. So if anybody has the perception clarity, so please bear me out. This is not just transition for coal only, but the fossil-based energy sources. You also have not only the supply side but the demand side, because there are hard to abate sectors. There also you need to have some kind of just transition. So that one aspect. On the aspect of whether there any group is there working on the energy transition, etc., I think there is a special group of secretaries have been constituted by the government, and they are already thought is going on at the higher level, but it's still the work in progress. I mean, that's the it may take some time to come out the clear. But at the NITI side, one, of course, we are interacting with the different stakeholders, and we are preparing different kind of modeling tools. One, of course, the ISS. There is another optimization model that is called TimesPeda, where the optimization aspect would be also taken care of. So there are two aspects, but at the same time, we are also interacting with all the knowledge partner think tanks to be on board. We have created a platform called India Climate Energy Modeling Forum, where all intergovernment departments, they are the member, and even our knowledge partner think tanks, say STEP, TERI, all they are the members of that. Even the international organization like IEA, Energy Information Administration, EIA, the various labs of the US, they are the members. So the contemporary issues, and if we face any kind of challenge with respect to the any transition agenda, we deliberate on the this platform, and accordingly the inputs are taken back to the modeling communities for building in their own modeling activities. So this is the level of consultation going on.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Usman. Sorry, I can come to you for the question.
Thank you. I realize that I've come all the way and I have really not done my job. And the commission is going to be very cross with me if I don't tell you about this one thing. One of the things we did as a commission, the Presidential Commission of South Africa, Climate Commission, is we developed a framework for a just transition in South Africa. And it is maybe a useful example for some of the issues that have been raised here, because the way we developed it, we went to communities, we went to trade unions, we went to business, we commissioned a set of papers to underpin our understanding of a just transition. Part of that process was an informing process so that everybody understood what it is and where we're going. And then we drafted it, and then we consulted the draft again with everybody. So then our cabinet, the government of South Africa's cabinet, adopted this as a national document. So all South Africans now have one common idea of what is the just transition we're talking about. And perhaps that might be a useful idea here as well.
No, thank you for bringing that. I think it's something very well to be considered. Last question, and then I will request Mr. Jain to wrap up and close the session. Can you just pass on the mic there, Mandvi? Sorry.
As per NITI Aayog, how do you define blue hydrogen to be in terms of just transition? Blue hydrogen from natural gas, and whereas carbon capture happens. So how we define that thing in terms of transition? And second thing is, which is much relevant for Odisha itself, we have mineral-rich states and we have lots of minerals wherein lithium can be replaced by, say, zinc or maybe aluminum. We have been having researches on that. It's before that we got the reserves of lithium in J&K, and the things have been different now. Now, are we trying to incentivize those initiatives wherein the old economy PSUs are actually transiting to the sunrise sector in terms of RE sector through the storage intervention? So is NITI Aayog having some focus in terms of policy initiative on that? Thank you.
If I can go back to your first question. Can you repeat the question, please?
Blue hydrogen.
Yes, sorry. So, we are coming out with the CCUS policy. I mean, carbon capture, utilization, and storage. We have constituted an interministerial committee, which is headed by Dr. V.K. Saraswat, and all the relevant ministries are part of that. So that work is going on, and the idea is to how to deploy the CCUS in the various sectors. That's one aspect. We are going for the coal gasification project. coal gasification is where also we are trying to include the CCUS as an integral part of that coal gasification. The coal gasification would take the route of producing various chemicals, including the methanol. So CCUS plus methanol, I mean, that's the one route can be followed for what you mentioned about the blue hydrogen. But even after that, I mean, the CCUS, if you are able, by implementing CCUS, if you are able to capture some of the carbon and still you go for the production of the hydrogen. So that's the route we are trying to follow it up. The coal gasification would be the major one. But at the same time, we are trying to reduce import of the natural gas. That's also the vision of the government. Because as of now, almost 55-56% of our total gas consumption is being made through the import. So how to reduce that? So what would be the alternative option for that? How to integrate CCUS with the coal gasification or other kind of stuff to make the blue hydrogen possible?
Thank you.
So can I just comment on this?
Sure.
And I think on the blue hydrogen thing, I mean, I'm just adding to what he said. In case of India, the blue hydrogen is not actually much of a thing to follow because one, we don't have natural gas, cheap natural gas to produce. So we import, as I said, we import all of natural gas. And after that, if we produce hydrogen and try to sequester it, that's why I said that we need to find ways to do carbon capture and utilization. Otherwise, blue hydrogen is a non-starter, which has been, I think, accepted. And our hydrogen mission document is actually a national green hydrogen mission document. So our focus in India is because we have abundant sources of renewable power. So producing hydrogen by splitting water using renewable power is probably the best way to go.
Yeah, please.
I'd just like to weigh in on two things. It is to some extent just about coal. And I want to respond to what the gentleman from Coal India, Central Coalfield said. The problem with coal as it's mined in India is not just the problem of permanent workers. 95% of coal in India comes from open cast mines. And the vast numbers of people employed in those mines are not your permanent workers. And this is actually where the challenge lies, because it's not just in the burning of coal, but our mining of coal, in which the overburden is the source of enormous particle pollution. These are things which we haven't quite gone into. It's not just about coal into thermal. Second, it is not just about coal. We could probably end up with a transition in which we replace all sources of fuel, fossil fuel burning with renewable forms. We could replace what's on our roads with electric vehicles. But unless we replace what's on our road with mass rapid transport, unless we actually shrink our roads, our transition is not going to be just, because we cannot afford to produce cars for the entire population. I mean, there's a simple basic numbers issue. And unless fairness steps in, there can be no just transition. And it's not about coal. It's actually, at the end of the day, it's not even about energy. At the end of the day, it's about fairness and justice.
Correct. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Modi. Thank you for that. Mr. Jain, I just wanted you to kind of help me wrap up. And I just wanted to give the last word to you. Now, you heard the views from the panel. You heard Mr. Jena talk about what states need, and you heard the other experts. There were questions on it, the idea of having a common framework based on what South Africa has done in the past. From your experience and the way you've seen, even the thinking within the government has changed, and you rightly pointed out to the way the positions on just transition has evolved. What do you think is the set of actions that need to happen in terms of as we move forward on just transition in India, so that, as Mr. Modi says, it has to be about justice, equity, it has to also to be about and making it very socially inclusive?
To my mind, India has given itself a fairly long lead time. 2070. Personally, I feel that we will get there even earlier.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that the large growing energy market and the technology of electrolyzers, cost coming down, renewable cost coming down, all this is going to make the energy transition happen, on its own, because we don't expect any large funding to be coming from the developed world. And we have very strong, large companies, be it Coal India, be it NTPC, and the big targets that we have given ourselves. So it's much easier to build in the greenness, build in the efficiencies as you grow a new energy system. So India's energy system is going to be maybe 2.5x of what it is presently. Everybody knows that the building stock is going to be maybe 2.5x again in the coming 20, 30 years. The LED revolution has shown us. Similarly, the hydrogen part, we have heard from people that with 300 clear sunny days, the cost of renewable is going to be one of the lowest in the country. So hydrogen mission, building in clean energy systems, efficient energy systems, clean cities. So to my mind, the markets and the energy growth which happens in the future will take care, and India will rise on its own strength. And we need it for ourselves, and we need it for the world. It will happen.
Thank you. Thank you so much for summarizing that. And that's also kind of sums up the way we need to look forward. And I want to thank each one of you, the panelists, for being there, for an active response, and to the such questions that we had put for you. Just a couple of things since Anshu is here, and I think you're going to moderate the next session. I think the point that came with respect to what needs to happen at the state, and since you're doing the discussion on state, one point was very clearly about that there is a need for a unified policies and frameworks and better coordination, but which is needed at the national level to drive some of the action at the state. Financing certainly is an area. We didn't touch much in this session, but I think the last session today talks about financing. That's going to be clear. And the center-state coordination is going to be so critical. So I think these are certainly key things that have come from a national perspective when it comes to sub-national level engagement. But once again, I want to thank each of the panelists. Thank you so much for your insights and for your contribution to the conversation.